Hey everyone, this is Checkpoint. Today we're going to be discussing The Witcher 3, the Fallout 4 announcement, among other things. I'm Tousif, and this is my colleague.
Hi guys, my name is Marcin. We're very excited. I think The Witcher 3 and Fallout 4 are two big games that some people have been very interested in, right?
A lot of people. Very big understatement.
Right. So I guess, Tousif, you could tell us about The Witcher 3. This is not a small game. Didn't come out too long ago, right?
No. It came out about a week ago. I don't even remember. I've just been playing it for all this time.
Let's just say it was yesterday, and then we just haven't had time to post this episode,
Okay, we could do that.
Yeah.
So it came out yesterday, according to Marcin. How to introduce The Witcher? Well, The Witcher is the third in a series of very unique games by a very unique studio, CD Projekt Red. Unique because they're a very successful Polish gaming studio. Interesting fact, when the Polish Prime Minister met President Obama, he actually gave President Obama a copy of The Witcher 2 because he felt that it was a cultural relic, and he was very proud of CD Projekt Red for becoming a high-profile company in the country of Poland.
Yo, Tousif, you know why our audience is lucky? We have a Polish person on the panel, and that's me. So
right.
I can kind of give that... I was born in America, but still have that connection to Poland, and I gotta say that just like... I don't know if this has really happened in any other country, any other country visiting Obama, or he visits and they give him a video game as Polish culture, a signifier of kind of what we represent as a society, or at least our beliefs in some ways, or kind of our lore, our background. And I think that was a very powerful moment. And actually with the third one, we just had elections back there in Poland, and one of the candidates was like, this is horrible timing because the only thing I'm going to do between now and election is going to be playing this game. So it was a big deal, and he took a copy just in case Obama wanted the third one. So just to expand on that story, yeah, it's a big deal, and I don't think it's just a big deal in Poland. So
it's unprecedented. No other high-level diplomatic gift has ever been a video game. This is the one and only.
Right, which is why it's worth talking about, I would say, on this show, and amongst other reasons. Yes.
So it is a very Polish game in terms of the culture and the world of The Witcher. It's a very Eastern European kind of setting, and the story and lore is something that supports that. The Witcher comes from a series of Polish novels, right?
Mm-hmm, yes. Andrzej Sapkowski.
Repeat that?
His name's Andrzej Sapkowski, the author.
I see. So The Witcher is not an original IP per se. It's a series of games that take place in a world that's already been established in literature. So that's another kind of interesting fact about The Witcher that sets it apart from other games of its kind. I didn't get into The Witcher until I played The Witcher 2, and I think that's how most people were first acquainted with The Witcher. Don't get me wrong, I played The Witcher 1, and it was a really good game. If you go back and play it today, it will feel kind of dated because of the graphics and the mechanics. But even then, I would have to say that using the technology that they had at the time, CD Projekt Red has been very successful at using game mechanics to emulate what it is to experience life as a witcher, as a monster hunter. Because even back then, they had very unique mechanics such as toxicity, which is a very creative way to cap the amount of potions that you could use. Because in other games, we know that we're never really 1 or 2 potions away from a full health bar, but Toxicity is something that limits your use of potions in this game, so you have to be strategic in the kinds of potions that you use. Other gameplay mechanics that they introduced in the first game, a day and night cycle where monsters would be much more numerous and much more aggressive during the night. And this is just going back to Witcher 1.
Oh,
They've
that was the
obviously
first game. I thought that was the third one. It sounded very impressive.
no, they had the day and night cycle all the way in the first game. But it really wasn't until the second game that a lot of people began to pay attention to the Witcher series. And so The Witcher 2 achieved a very high rating on Metacritic, somewhere in the high 80s, I believe, which may not sound that impressive, but it's actually a lot for an aggregator, because you have to keep in mind that a lot of bad scores get taken into account too.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I think it's a huge score. You have to remember this trilogy is sort of like the trilogy also of like CD Projekt Red growing up as a studio, because the first game was their first game, and it was extremely rough. But it was very rough and endearing in that Eastern European way. We won't get into these games, but Stalker is kind of, I think, the same thing. There's a very specific audience that just loves that, but it has its own, just its own particular elements that both turn off like a lot of other people, but also just really endear it to the hearts of like this very select group. And that was the first game. I think like what they mastered was they kept the things that made it unique, but they chipped away all the rough edges as they went on. So the second one was like that critical mass where it's like, wow, this is a really solid game that like so many people, like maybe not anyone can play. Like you can't just pick it up if you've never played a video game before, but if you're like a reliable, like someone who just plays, you know, just time to time even, but and knows what a video game is and what the A button from the B button or whatever, you can play this game and you can enjoy it. And that's very impressive for not many studios. Second game get in the high 80s, and then the third game, as we already know, is a little bit higher than that.
Already people are heralding it as one of the greatest video games ever made, and I have to say, as someone who's played a lot of video games, that may not even be a hyperbolic statement. This may actually be one of the greatest video games ever created. And just as you've mentioned before, this is CD Projekt Red's third outing. Very impressive. We could probably name a lot of studios that have made over 10 games, dozens of games, and they're still not doing well.
Yeah, we could, but we won't. We'll spare them. We'll spare them the pain, right?
Right. So yeah, let's talk about what The Witcher actually is, get some basics down before we start handling the much more intricate details of the video game. So essentially, you play as Geralt of Rivia, who is a Witcher, the titular character. And what a Witcher is that they're monster hunters, but they're interesting in that they're not humans. They have to undergo mutations which increase their strength, their speed, their senses are heightened as well. And these mutations make them technically not human. And this is something that you're reminded of quite often when you're adventuring in the world as Geralt of Rivia. People actually look at Witchers with disgust and disdain, and you get a lot of trouble for it. But at the end of the day, there are monsters that need killing, and you are the only one who can do it. In fact, there aren't very many Witchers left in the world, and amongst those Witchers, Geralt of Rivia is one of the most famous. He can drop his name, and people will instantly know about all the curses that he's lifted, all the monsters that he's killed.
So he's like Chuck Norris of the Witcher world, basically.
He's Chuck Norris carrying two swords, and he never runs out of whetstones, I guess you could say.
Okay.
He has a third whetstone in his beard, maybe.
Right, exactly. All right, so I think that's a good character introduction. It's an RPG, right? So you basically do all of that RPG stuff. You collect loot, you upgrade your character with different armors, you use those potions, as you mentioned, with that twist of toxicity, which doesn't make it, something that you can just lean on throughout the entire game. So I think we can just launch into the third one at this point. Yeah.
Do you want to start talking about it first, since you played a bit less than I have?
Yeah, so it's kind of like an initial impressions I can give, because that's like all I can give at this point. I've got to say, when I played it, I I actually saw someone else play it a few days later. I played like the first hour or so. So there's an introduction. You go through like a little bit of a tutorial where you're in a castle and you're like doing all the kind of introductory parts of any game. But they mastered the tutorial well. It's very natural. You're doing combat because you're training to be a witch, or you're just training your skills against the elder witcher. And basically, once you finish that, you kind of flash forward into this open world that everyone's been very hyped about once this game was announced. This is also CD Projekt Red's first open world game. So I think they kind of set a bar, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I will contend at great length about why this is the greatest open world experience that you will ever lay your hands on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the first thing, and I think that what's just very amazing for me, and not a lot of games do this well, and it was just maybe a lot of other games do this, but they don't do it as well. It was so like subtle, but the first time I played it, I got to his hut where there's this older lady. I'm not sure if you saw this part, and she was banging at the door of her hut, and the witcher asked what's wrong, and someone apparently took her frying pan. And
I've done this quest.
Yes, it's not really much of a quest, or at least the first part isn't. But the whole point is that as I walked, the first time was just, you're by the side of a river, it's sunny and everything. The second time, you just see this massive formation of gray clouds in the distance, and the wind is blowing through the grass and the trees, and it's just this effect of being immersed in the world that not just detail or textures can give. It was just this animation to it that kind of gave life that I don't think I've seen before. Even GTA 5 is extremely impressive and detailed, and the PC version took that slightly to the next level, but you don't have that dynamism, that's not a word, but in terms of that level of reaction to what's happening.
It is a word.
Yeah, I guess it is. Okay, good. So that's the first point. As you're walking through, there's subtle soundtrack cues, so you walk into like a town and maybe it changes a little bit. There's all this stuff that's very well done in other very good games, but it's also very well done here. I think another thing that struck me was in the first hour, there's perhaps 3 separate set pieces. The first one is in the castle, so it's like this up in the mountains, and it's like this frosty mountains around you, and the lighting is slightly different. When you start at the flash forward, because that was like kind of we won't spoil too much by saying that first sequence was a dream, but the second sequence, when the Witcher wakes up, he's in this very like at the top of this hill where the sun is rising, and it's just these colors that are striking all of the... Artistically, this game is, from the first bat, just an amazing looking project, and there's just this confidence and professionalism whenever the characters talk. The voice actors did a splendid job, and I'll say one more thing, because with a Polish background, I wanted to check how the other voiceovers were made, so I switched the language to Polish. And I think what I noticed is when you talk to different types of people, depending on their social status, they literally have different types of accents, and their dialects are different in that it's very subtle. But in Polish history, there were several versions of the language, and which probably doesn't come across as well in English because it's more of a newer language that we don't have that many nuances in. But you can just they use words, different characters that are very like blunt and not as sophisticated as maybe like a scholar would use, and it's very well done. Just the level of detail in like every aspect. So it's like recording the languages for all that dialogue. That's in itself must be a humongous project, and that's just like a tiny percentage of what this game is. So that was my impression.
I have a question about the voiceovers. I do want to agree with you about how vast the voice work for this game is. Everything is voiced. There's no throwaway dialogue. Everyone gives a great performance for every single line in the game, be it ambient or direct character interactions. But is this game recorded in other languages?
Yes.
Is it recorded in Polish?
Yeah, that's what I switched it to.
That's what you were talking about?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I see.
Yeah, so that whole soundtrack that you're hearing is in at least 4 or 5 other languages, recorded by a
Wow.
completely different set of actors. And at least the Polish set, again, I haven't played much of the game, I've played 2 or 3 hours, but from comparing the same level of quality, of course, the guy who plays Geralt is not Polish in the English version, so he doesn't do the voices, and most of the people don't, for their counterparts in different languages, but he does a great job too. He gets that same gruff. It's a little bit of a different character, so if you're used to it, obviously you won't it'll be a little bit of a kind of throw you off a little, but you probably won't play in Polish, or you'll play in your favorite language anyway, so this is not too relevant. Don't be afraid that you won't recognize Geralt, because if you've heard him before, you'll hear the same voice actor again, basically. Alright, so Tousif, I've talked about the first 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You've gotten a little bit further.
Yes, I have. I think I have 20 hours inside the game, maybe?
So you're almost done with it.
No. I think I have 10% completed.
Did we mention this game is long?
It's very long. I think that estimates have put it at over 100 hours of content.
Right. And that's insane given just how much detail there is. Because there's games that say that they're that long, but there's just a lot of rinse and repeat things that happen.
Yes.
Right. So
yeah.
Not to point fingers, but...
And there's no kind of throwaway content in this game at all. So I guess this is a good time to expand our discussion to some in-depth details about the open world, right?
Mm-hmm.
So first, I want to address the immersive qualities that you were talking about before. Right. So the weather adds definitely this dynamic quality, and you were talking about the wind before, right?
Mm-hmm.
The way the wind moves the trees, and even the weather in the sky seems to be shifting, and it's as if the entire world is moving. Even if you're standing completely still, you'll notice that the trees around you, even the water moves a bit, and that kind of detail, at least this kind of weather effect, isn't something that we've seen in other games. There are also a lot of open world games that have what I like to call dead spots. These are basically spots that look impressive from a distance, but they're not really interactive. If you go to these spots with your player character, there isn't anything very interesting going on. In The Witcher, I find that that's almost never the case. Wherever I am, there's an herb to pick, or there's a pack of wolves, or a group of bandits ready to ambush me. There's always a surprise waiting for you on every single patch of this open world, it seems. And that never gives you the idea that this open world is fake or constructed, that its vastness is an illusion. This is vast in scope, and it delivers on that vastness. There's always minutia that backs up the large scale of the open world. There are a lot of, once again, I'm comparing this to other open world games and how this improves. There are other open world games where it gives you, once again, the illusion of a lot to do.
Do you want to call names? Because maybe the audience would be more familiar. I mean, some great games, right? Skyrim, maybe we can kind of analyze alongside this. I guess we can, just to make it easier for you to, give an example, or at least structure your comparison.
So what do I have in mind specifically? Well, let's take World of Warcraft, for instance, right? Maybe this is a bit unfair picking on World of Warcraft because it's a very old open world game, but I think that the mistake that you find in World of Warcraft is found in a lot of open world games, and that is boring quests of a very banal nature. One prime example would be a fetching quest, where you basically go out, you grab X amount of item Y, and you hand it in. There, done. That's the quest.
And then the next quest is grab 2x of Y. Right.
Now, to be fair, this doesn't mean that grabbing X of Y doesn't entail killing monsters, some kind of interaction that is otherwise interesting. But what The Witcher improves, how The Witcher improves on this kind of dead trope in open world games, is that there's no quest in this game that doesn't have a significantly compelling narrative aspect to it. I think part of this compelling narrative aspect comes from the fact that the voice acting is so excellent. It definitely brings every single quest alive because of this. Skyrim is one of those games where you will find that the voice acting gets a bit repetitive, and that, you know, kind of takes away from the immersive ambiance that some of these quests could potentially have. But you never get that sense with The Witcher 3. There's always some kind of interesting narrative aspect that drives the quest forward. For example, I think this is my favorite example, and I'm probably going to use this a lot in terms of explaining why The Witcher 3's side quests are so marvelous. So I go to this town, this regular looking town. I go to the notice board and I pick up a contract for a missing person, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I go see who put up the contract, and it turns out to be this hunter who's lost his wife. So then I go about interviewing people, and the clues that I basically have are that she left the village with another woman, and I don't know the identity of this woman. So I follow the direction where she went, and I find myself encountering a pack of wolves. I kill those wolves, and then the missing woman's sister shows up, who I had spoken to before, and the missing woman's sister says that I should just give up this search because her sister's probably dead. That's what happens to people when they go missing around these parts. I would rather you save the husband from any more due tragedy by just finding the dead body and informing him that his wife is dead.
Uh-huh. So why didn't you take her advice?
Because I thought that, you know, something fishy was going on. Why did she show up out of nowhere?
She's trying to help you.
Well, maybe that's the thing. The Witcher's always making you ask questions, right? Like a good book or a good movie should. So now I'm suspecting her. So I decide not to take her advice. I keep on searching for the missing woman because I want to complete my job. This is the kind of Witcher that I'm playing. And so this leads me to a werewolf den, interestingly enough. So you meet a werewolf and you fight the werewolf, and you find out that the werewolf is actually the hunter who put out the post for the missing wife, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when you're about to kill him, the sister of the missing wife shows up and she says, wait, stop. This was all my fault. All I wanted was to bring your wife and show her that you're a horrible monster so that she would reject you and so that I could have you. This was a love triangle, essentially, right? But things go wrong, and the werewolf, her husband, ends up eating her.
Oh, okay.
And killing her. Right.
Cool. Yeah.
The reason he doesn't remember this is because werewolves don't remember what happened while they're a werewolf. But the thing is that I know he's being a responsible werewolf. The den that I found him in looks like the den that he goes to always wait out his curse so that he doesn't harm anyone. Right? So he's being responsible. But now I have a choice. Now that he knows that his wife's sister is responsible for his wife's death, he wants to murder his wife's sister. So I have a choice. I can either, I think that the sister deserves to die, and I could just not stand in the way, or I could vie on the side of life and say that you're not going to murder another person in cold blood. And so I kill the werewolf.
Mm-hmm.
And this all started, may I remind you, from going to a town and looking up a missing persons case. This is the kind of stuff that you will find in every single quest. There's always this amount of intrigue. This is the standard. This isn't even some kind of exclusion to the rule.
Right, there's no just, hey, I need this. Could you go get it for me? I don't think maybe there is one or two instances, but it just doesn't happen. Whereas in the art, like it's very strange because you'd almost think like the archetypical, like definition of an RPG, or at least it includes this kind of content in it, and they completely veered off course and just invested so much into the story around getting experience points, because that's basically what an RPG is. You want to become as powerful as possible while you're advancing a story at the same time, but they just make every part as if it's its own event. And in terms of the focus and the detail, I think you might notice if you've played the game or if you've seen it, is even these side quests, they have the level of detail, not just in the characters speaking, but there's dynamic camera angles where it feels like it's just everything is tuned to perfection, every part of it. And that's not like Skyrim. You're literally, the camera zooms in on the person you're talking to, and it just waits until you're done, and then it just zooms out, which is, it's such a like a humongous difference in terms of the amount of attention that goes into those small details.
No, yeah, there's definitely a cinematic element because the camera is controlled by the developers in this game. You mentioned, I mean, the game begins with a very cinematic setting where Geralt wakes up from a dream, and you see behind him this orange sunset lighting up the hills behind him. So yeah, you can do stuff like that. Suffice it to say that the main quests are actually much more compelling. So that should definitely whet your appetite. Yeah, The Witcher has a history of providing extremely epic and cinematic main quests, and this does not fail.
Which I hope it shouldn't, because everything from what I heard of this game is an improvement. So obviously the main quest will be even more epic than the first and second games.
Yes.
And on the way to these kind of story, just these different plot points as you progress through both side and the main quest, there is combat, right? And I think that there's something very...
Oh, is there combat?
There is quite some combat, and I think from what I've heard, it's described as a blend between the rhythm of something like the Batman games and something more methodical and risky, where any, like, not any hit, but where you have to be very careful, like the Dark Souls games. So would you agree that it falls in between that spectrum?
I definitely think that it falls in between that spectrum. To elaborate a bit more, it's a bit more unforgiving than Batman because, for example, in the Batman games, you're actually encouraged to allow your character Batman to be surrounded by people so that you could use them for fueling your combos. Being surrounded is not a problem. You could counter everything, no matter what direction it's coming from. But in The Witcher, you actually do not want to get surrounded ever. That is suicide. You want to try to isolate one enemy and wear them down. And in that respect, it's much more on the side of Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and Bloodborne. I actually think that the combat in The Witcher 2 and 3, the combat in Witcher 1 is very different.
Don't they change the systems completely? Like that's like what I felt. There wasn't much that was shared in the DNA between the three games when I've played all three, and it just didn't feel like they kind of like rewrite the system each time.
Well, the jump between Witcher 2 and Witcher 3 in terms of combat and systems, I would say, is much less drastic than the jump between Witcher 1 and Witcher 2. The combat in Witcher 1 is nothing like the combat in Witcher 2 or 3.
It was more rhythm-based and like clicking the mouse in the right order.
Yeah, you remember. Yeah, it was more rhythm-based. Dodging was not as difficult. You don't have to worry about a monster breaking your combo in the middle of your clicking because it's all you at that point. If you misclick, then it's on you, but there's no way that the monster could counterattack. Mm-hmm. But I actually find the combat in Witcher 2 and 3 much more enjoyable and interesting than that of Dark Souls. I haven't played Bloodborne, so I can't comment on that yet. But I actually enjoy the combat in Witcher 2 and Witcher 3 much more than I do in Dark Souls. I still think that Dark Souls is a bit more unforgiving because of the attention to character animations that you have to make.
Right. It almost embraces the video gaming aspect where you just know that an animation is going to take this and this many frames, and you have to counter in that time or roll out in that time, and you know how long your roll is. So it's a very mathematical way of combat. I think maybe that's a good way of describing. Like, you know how your sword is always going to swing the same rhythm in the same direction in the same distance.
Yeah, it's basically a fighting game kind of mentality where the frame time of certain moves are very paramount. To be a hardcore player in Demon Souls and Bloodborne, you definitely have to be cognizant about that. I think that The Witcher 2 and The Witcher 3 have those elements, just not to the same degree of extremity. To the degree of punishment, but it's still there. So I would put it on a slider between Arkham and Bloodborne. I would put it very close to Bloodborne, but not at that hardcore level. Um, I actually think so. The combat between Witcher 2 and Witcher 3 is changed up. I think that the combat in Witcher 3 is much more fluid. You feel a bit more in control as Geralt in Witcher 3 than you do in Witcher 2, because in Witcher 2 your only way of moving in combat is this roll that really moves you a long distance, whereas in Witcher 3 you have two movement displacing buttons in combat. One of them gives you that roll, which really moves your character a long way, and then the other one is just a slight dodge. So you have much more control over your character in that way. So I think that the combat in Witcher 3 is definitely a huge improvement from the combat in Witcher 2. And it definitely succeeds in making you feel like Geralt the Witcher, because part of being a Witcher is that you're a fighter who doesn't wear armor. You wear leather armor, but not plate armor. So you're not the kind of person who wants to take hits. And for that to be lore accurate, you have to really count on your dodges, and movement is paramount. For most of these fights, it's 80% footwork, really.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think I just want to touch on that point you had near the beginning where you don't want to get surrounded, but I think that's logical, because if you're a sword fighter, you only have one sword, and that's only facing one direction. Obviously, you're going to get stabbed in the back if you run into a crowd of enemies, so why would they want that element to be there? It would just kind of, again, we have to remember that how immersive and graphically intense and how much detail there is in the world. If the combat was arcadey, it would ruin the ambiance, like the immersion.
Yes, definitely. There's also a very good dismemberment code in this game. There's a chance on the last hit of any combatant opponent that you're fighting that they will be dismembered, and it really does pay attention to where your sword struck their body, so that the line in which they're dismembered follows that contour exactly, and it's very satisfying when you get those dismemberments.
So if you guys don't get it yet, this game is extremely well detailed, and kind of every single thing was considered. Maybe just to expand a little bit, it's not just the swords that the combat is. There's a lot more to it than just swinging around like a madman in this world.
Yes.
Because The Witcher has certain abilities and things that he must do, correct?
The Witcher is a very adept swordsman, as well as having access to simple magic. They call them signs in this game, as opposed to the more complex magic that actual mages and sorceresses can do. Signs are one-word spells that have quick effects, and there are 5 of them. There have been 5 of them for all the games. These are the 5 signs that all Witchers know, which add a very strategic element to the game, because you can't use them consecutively. There's this stamina bar that fills up, and once it's filled up, you can throw out a sign. But once you throw out that sign, you have to wait for the stamina bar to replenish before you can throw out any other sign. So there's sword play, there's magic that you also use in combat, and finally there are potions and oils, the alchemy portion of what it means to be a Witcher. So in addition to having mutations that augment their strength, their speed, and give them heightened senses, Witchers are also able to survive, in addition to that and their magic, against difficult monster encounters, because of the vast knowledge of potions and chemicals that they have, which allows them to create potions for any kind of situation, and oils that, when applied to your blade, actually deal more damage to a certain type of creature. So being prepared as a Witcher for a certain combat experience is very much represented in the gameplay mechanics of that game, in the gameplay mechanics of The Witcher through the alchemy system.
I think we have a suggestion, though, in terms of when you first start. Well, you can change this at any time from what I understand, but to that point where you have these various systems that you kind of have to, or at least are exposed to when you are told, hey, you have to do this, you need this oil when you're fighting this monster, otherwise you won't be able to hurt that much, etc., etc. There is a very obvious kind of curve in between the 4 difficulty levels, where I think you and I would sort of agree that there is a optimal way to play this game if you are looking for that role-playing experience, which I'm assuming most people are, right? Not just to hack and slash through. And I think...
some people might want to just do that.
Right.
They do say specifically in the beginning, if you just want the story, here's a difficulty that makes combat extremely easy.
But we strongly recommend...
Yes, that you don't choose that difficulty.
And we strongly recommend the hardest difficulty,
yes.
Because we're masochists.
Yeah, from my own experience, I cannot tell you how satisfying it was after. So I come across a group of 3 drowners. Drowners are basically one of the joke monsters of the Witcher series. You know, you'll hear Geralt say lots of times, "Oh, great, drowners," right?
Yeah,
because
like
they're
orcs in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, they're fodder, right? But the thing is, you play on the hardest difficulty, and it took me 20 tries.
Just 3?
20 tries to beat 3 drowners.
Oh, man.
Right? But given that this is in the very beginning of the game, where everything is very difficult because you haven't specialized yet, you're not really particularly good at swords, magic, or alchemy, so you don't have that kind of tree supporting your play style. You're just a bare bones Witcher. And it was a learning experience, because after I took 20 tries to beat them, I realized that in this level, in this high difficulty, you cannot be aggressive. One scratch from these drowners took away a third of my health. And there will be situations where if you don't position yourself correctly, one scratch will be followed up by another, or maybe another on top of that, from the other drowners. So that really taught me that positioning was important, playing defensively was important, and in adopting this playstyle, I realized that they really did communicate the experience of being a Witcher very well in this game, and you can only get that kind of experience when you're playing on the hardest difficulty, when you're forced to use all of your sword knowledge, all of your signs, and forced to actually prepare for battle by using your oils and potions beforehand.
Right, yeah, and I totally agree. From the little that I played, there was a big difference between the playing it on easy and hard in terms of the satisfaction. So that's kind of the game in a nutshell, at least how much we've played. I've barely touched it, scratched the surface, but you've kind of not really either. That 20 hours is very long for other video games, but as we said, it's not nothing for this experience. So I think we'll continue on that, and I think we're very excited to see what's next, both in that game, and they have 2 expansions coming out. So far it's a great game, and I think it's already like trending up into one of those greatest games we've ever played, and a lot of people agree with that. But there are a few concerns, or at least observances about the game that I've noticed in several corners of the internet, both in the general public, so I'm talking about comment sections, and then the more well-known critics. And I think one review that really stood out to me was Polygon's. And if you don't know, they kind of, the reviewer Arthur Geis had concerns about how the world seemed somewhat, well, I'll put one thing to the side and I'll focus on the racism now. In terms of the characters that you meet, they're all 90%, how better to say this, but white, just normal Caucasian from mostly Eastern Europe looking types of individuals. And we kind of wanted to bring that up, and I want to throw this to you, Tousif. Is this something that stood out to you? Did you feel as if there was a missed opportunity here, or is this how it should be? Is this even a concern?
Well, I never really pay attention to this stuff, to be honest. I think that if you're going to judge this game fairly with respect to representation, you're going to have to look at the world that they're inhabiting, right? So at least the article that you gave me, it didn't suggest that what The Witcher 3 did. Oh, you want me to tell you which article?
Well, I was gonna say the US Gamer article
Yes.
that will have a link posted in the video and also in the description. So yeah, just to just to make sure the audience knows. Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're citing our stuff. We're very professional. So there's this US Gamer article that touched upon The Witcher 3 race and fantasy homages, and it expressed disappointment in the fact that The Witcher 3 didn't represent more non-Caucasian characters in the game, and it suggested that there are parts in The Witcher, the world of The Witcher, where such characters would exist, so that there is a context in which you can introduce them. Um, that is the gist of what this article was trying to say, right?
Yeah, I would say so, and also I think the author was finally a little bit he was finally balanced because he also recognized, and I think that this is, if someone were to bring this up to me in any context, whether the game was made, and this is a good point, if the game was made in, or a game was made in Africa, or a game was made in Mexico, the likelihood of them overrepresenting the type of populace that the developers, they live with every day is just much higher than
Right.
in other places. I think it's unfair to judge from several angles. One, most of AAA games nowadays, the ones that get lots of exposure and just have the largest audiences, they're made in North America, which is an extremely diverse population, and we've always been sensitive to race issues. So if in our media we see that there is a underrepresentation of a certain group, there is a higher likelihood that we'll see some kind of discord, some kind of discussion about it. The game was made in Poland, which is the first point. There is about like a 95% native population there, so all Eastern Europeans, so obviously white people, and that's one point. The second point, they chose a region which, from what I understand, is just more predominantly that type of, in the game's fiction, that lore tells us that that's the kind of group of people that you have there. And I don't think it's 100%. I think you run into some other kinds of, ethnicity. They don't have, obviously, Asians or Africans or things like that because it's a fantasy world, but they do sort of hint and show some of these characters. But it's not like it was done consciously, that they said, okay, we just want to have these kinds of characters. It's just the kind of story in the world that they're telling. Just as you have in, we're not justifying this, but that's the way that they express themselves. So you can find other games which have different groups of people. And I don't think it's, they're making a mountain out of a molehill sometimes with this. And
I also think it's kind of strange to attack The Witcher 3 for underrepresentation, because I think that racism is a huge part of the narrative when you look at how dwarves and elves are treated in the world of The Witcher. We actually hear, when we're playing the game, about race riots happening. We actually experience, when we play the game, racism in the cities where dwarves and elves inhabit these places in ghettos, essentially, where they live apart from everyone else in the city, and it's very reticent of how racism works in the real world. So for me, it's strange to accuse The Witcher 3 of not handling topics of racism very well. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I think that's another great point. And I think Dragon Age has gone to similar lengths with their elf species. So it's,
yes, yeah.
I would throw credit to BioWare too. It's not something that is that the RPG developers are oblivious to. It's just the medium in which they tell. And I think I'd want to give an example. If we had, so Mass Effect is a sci-fi series, and I just wanted to think of the most extreme case where this would be an absurd argument. If you run into aliens and none of them are colored brown or white, for example, and all of a sudden you have this, oh, there are no white individuals in this game, that's Mass Effect, they run into purple aliens and things like that. It's kind of like that's the universe that they exist in. The Witcher isn't planet Earth. It's its own entity. It came out of someone else's mind. They didn't think about skin colors as a way of differentiating between different groups of people. They have different ways of doing that. And they do have skin colors. It's just that there's different mixes of things. There's different degrees to which different fantasy universes express these things. So
Yeah, I think that's all that there is really to say on this.
Mm-hmm. The other angle is the misogynist angle, which is always very fun with the Witcher games. I think we'll agree that there's a little bit more, but there is also nuance to this argument. I mean, I can kick it off because the first game kind of, just to take it down the spectrum, I feel like CD Projekt Red has also learned from their mistakes in this regard, but they're still labeled as, some people label the content as slightly masculine and against the independence of females or things like that. The first one had you collecting player cards for different females that Geralt spent time with, if you know what I mean. And I can see there is distaste in that kind of does bring down that element of, this is another person we're talking about, and you're just kind of making them a prize, literally, like a thing that you collect, which, but that, from what I understand, that just hasn't translated. That has gotten more subtle as the games have gone on. And from what I've seen, just the specifically the sex and whatever, these scenes, they're not gratuitous where you just have,
I would call them tasteful.
Yeah, they're not. It's what would happen. It's that world, but moderated, just to understand that, there are things that naturally happen, and this is how people behave. The other angle, which I find absurd, is that this game diminishes females, which I would flip it on its head, because the strongest character in this game is a female. It is the person that the whole story is about. And even though she's in trouble, people can be in trouble, but she can kick ass. And I don't think there's a secret that when you do play her in this game, you're just going to be ripping guys apart faster than Geralt ever can.
Yes. My jaw actually dropped when I first played as Ciri and I pressed the dodge button and saw what she could do.
Yes, so she expresses herself, and of course the characters are stylized, but the audience is male, and you have to kind of take the medium for what it's worth. Like, there is a little bit of self-indulgence in maybe some of the art and things like that, but that's just, it's definitely has improved, and I can't, it's very valid to bring these issues up, but you can't really make them the focus because there's so much good that's around this project. I think it was, just as we've been mentioning, it's such a labor of love. I don't think anyone ever felt that they wanted to exclude or put down a group of people in real life. It's just, it kind of takes it a little bit too far. So I don't know if you have anything else to say on that.
No, I agree with you. I would also remind people that some of the most powerful characters in the game world are females because they're sorcerers, and sorcerers are known to be very powerful characters in the Witcher world.
Mm-hmm. So again, pushing that theme, yeah. And so Tousif, that's like the dark side of the controversies. I heard you wanted to address something a little less serious in terms of how The Witcher was announced and then released.
So I'm pretty sure that you're talking about the graphics downgrade that was not addressed when The Witcher was released.
Mm-hmm.
We received, the public received footage of in-game Witcher video that was gorgeous. Everyone's jaw dropped on the floor. We were thinking, wow, video games have come such a long way when we saw the graphical fidelity of the footage, the lighting, the textures, everything was top-notch. When this footage came out, people thought that The Witcher 3 was going to be the next Crisis, the next game that really pushed hardware to a point where it was challenged by software.
You wouldn't be able to run it for a few years at max settings, basically, on anything. Yeah.
Right. When the game was released, the actual graphics the actual graphical fidelity which was shipped out was not as impressive as the graphical fidelity that we saw in that footage. This isn't to say that The Witcher 3 is an ugly game. It's still a very beautiful game. It's still one of the best games that's out right now in terms of graphics. You still need a very good rig to play it on high settings, but you could definitely tell that there was a graphics downgrade between the footage that was shown previously and the game that was shipped. So the controversy is that, well, basically, is this right? I told you before that this is not something that was announced, but I think that I can't really get too upset at CD Projekt Red because in terms of earning good faith, they're one of the best companies out there in the video game community, and they actually did address this fact in an interview later, and they stated that their reasoning for not saying outright that the graphics were downgraded is that they just didn't think it was that important. And, I kind of agree with them. Kind of. Not entirely, but kind of. I don't think it was that important. I'm not really crying about it. But it is something I would have liked to know. Mm. But I do see why they chose not to make a huge deal out of it, because they probably would have suffered a lot of bad PR if they did.
Mm-hmm. So I do mostly agree, and I think there's two sides to every argument. Mr. Obvious over here stating what always happens, but the positive one, which you mentioned, and I love that they handled this as smoothly as possible, given that it had already happened. Of course, the best way to handle it would have been to not have the controversy happen in the first place. But the way that they handled it was extremely professional. And I think if you completely believe in the story, and which we don't have any reason not to, what you do have during development is you have goals, and you set goals for the graphics team, you set goals for the gameplay design team. We're going to have X and X 100 features. We're going to we have 120 planned. We're going to need at least like these 100 look like they're good. We'll see if the 5 of these and the other 15 are just not going to work. Same thing I think happens with the technical side of it. Again, let's emphasize, this is a humongous open world game, and it has to run, and this is a part of the story, I think, it has to run well both on PCs and on consoles, which are more powerful than they used to be, but are still extremely weak and always falling behind, as usually consoles are. And what happens there is, financially, you can't get a game with this kind of level of detail and investment without earning a lot of revenue in return, correct? So you need a large audience.
Right.
If you have a PC audience, that's big, but it's not large enough, as has been kind of understood. You have to, just because of the rising cost of development, you have to build the game for 3 platforms. And I think the timing for me is a little bit unclear, but when we started seeing videos of this game, the specifications for the consoles weren't as set in stone as obviously now because we have them, but it has been a while since the game was announced, and I feel like they had certain targets which they knew they could reach with the PC version, but they had to kind of, as they go along, and as I think with any process, they had to assign kind of priorities. Maybe there were things, and I think they've said there were things that they improved from that demo that we saw, or at least those trailers. We couldn't tell how large the open world was. We couldn't tell if the wind physics even existed in those old builds. Maybe they kind of rebalance the game so that they can add more detail into that, more resources into those aspects of the game than just texture and lighting quality. They basically ripped out for what I understand, the lighting engine that they had in that, and they rebuilt a new one which enabled all of these other things to run well. So there's just the realities that we have to face. But I think you mentioned this before, it's still, and I would take it to the next level, I think it's the most impressive looking game there is out right now. And I can't think, just because you can't just look at texture quality, compare Geralt, and let's say that he's a level 9 out of 10 character in terms of all the characters that we know in all video games in terms of the level of detail. You can't say because he's a 9 out of 10 and there's a 10 out of 10 character in another game that's slightly more detailed than him, that the graphics are worse, because that other game with that extremely detailed character is definitely going to have a much less detailed open world, not those physics or whatever. So there's trade-offs and everything, and I just liked the balance that they struck in terms of the artistic and the technical side of things. So that's yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned before the fact that uh, with consoles they could reach a wider audience. Because they could reach a wider audience, they get more money and they can make a better game. We could definitely see this true when we look at the difference between The Witcher 1 and The Witcher 2. The Witcher 1 being a PC exclusive in terms of graphical fidelity, it really wasn't that impressive. But when The Witcher 2 came out, it wasn't a PC exclusive. It was on PC and Xbox, and it was one of the most graphically intense games ever created. In fact, playing Witcher, I think that ironically enough, the max settings for Witcher 2 are more intensive than the max settings for The Witcher 3, mostly because The Witcher 2 has this one setting called Uber sampling, which takes up a lot of frame rate. But there are also a lot of people out there saying that graphically The Witcher 2 is better than The Witcher 3. And I will say this. I will say that the lighting, which really seems to be the biggest point of contention when people are talking about the graphics downgrade. You mentioned before that the lighting engine was just pulled out.
Well, let me just illustrate. Let me just illustrate, because I think visually, what I'm going to put up on the screen right now is two shots that I've seen before. There's the Wild Hunt, the characters in a burning village, and you can see the main dude. And they have that shot, and I've seen this shot in the old engine, and right now you're playing them, and they look completely different. There's like all of this flame in the older shot, which is like playing off of the metal on his armor. It's extremely, you see the sparks flying, and then it's just like night and day. And that's the lighting. That's the lighting that's making that
That's
difference.
all lighting, yeah. So, and I think the lighting for The Witcher 2 is superior because it wasn't an open world game. They didn't have the problems that they had. So I'm pretty sure that the lighting that we would have had for The Witcher 3 was going to be a huge improvement on the lighting for The Witcher 2, which is some of the best lighting in any video game. And I'm saying the word lighting a lot, but please understand me when I say that lighting is probably one of the most important parts of making a modernly tuned graphics intensive game very, very good.
It can kind of,
they bring textures to life, basically.
Yeah.
That's what adds the realism to something that's trying to achieve that effect.
And I would also say, if it's done extremely well, it can kind of push aside the weak parts of that. And I think, I don't know. I don't know if you've played Alien.
You can have really good lighting, and you can have really bad textures, and the really good lighting will make it look like it's an amazing game, even if the textures are bad.
Case in point, Alien Isolation I played. I don't know if you have, but the lighting in that was ridiculous. If I looked very close at the walls, they weren't, but you had to look very close at the walls. But,
right. To negate the lighting effect.
But you shouldn't be looking at walls because you'll be killed by the aliens. So don't do that if you ever start playing that game. It was extremely impressive. I think that was one of the best lighting models, along with Witcher 2, that I've seen. And just that point, they had to kind of rebalance. And we don't know if the first version of The Witcher 3, quote-unquote first version, they didn't know. Maybe they had a smaller open world. Maybe they didn't have as much animals running around. Maybe they had no physics. Maybe that's the stuff that they added in, and then they took out the lighting. So you have that trade-off. Maybe the game wouldn't feel as dynamic if we had that lighting, because I think that was the main point of contention and what everyone was talking about and what they mentioned as being the major change.
I do think that if we were going to play this first version of The Witcher, it definitely would have been the Crisis of PC games. It definitely would have been the Crisis of PC games. But because the lighting was done in a way that made it so that the open world was possible, we still have a very gorgeous game. And I wouldn't contest that it's the greatest looking game to ever come out. But I will say, not to put too much hope into your hearts, at the end of that interview, when the CD Projekt Red employee was talking about the graphics downgrade, he told us to look out for future updates.
Ooh.
It's very cryptic, and actually, I'm hoping that they bring the lighting back in some way, shape, or form, maybe as an option, maybe as a pack that you could download. I don't think that it works that way, so I wouldn't get my hopes up too much. But it was a very cryptic end, and it's enough to keep me on the edge of my seat.
Yeah, there's precedent in the industry for that, and also I think we don't blame CD Projekt for any of this too heavily because they've shown historically that they love to add on to their games to give to the people who were kind enough to buy them and continue to improve them. It was mostly content for Witcher 1 and 2, but maybe we'll see a graphical enhancement. We don't know technically how that would work, but there's definitely ways to improve the visuals, I think, that they could do.
Speak about the good faith. They've already given owners of Witcher 3 over 20 DLCs.
Yes, like small
23
additions. Yeah.
DLC editions. Yes. Small, but good enough, for us to appreciate the work that they put in.
And we really appreciate that work. I mean, I think to summarize, we kind of summarized it before, but despite any controversy, it's just a ridiculous game. It kind of takes... it is a bar already, and a few games get me in like the first 2 or 3 hours saying these things, but they've really just knocked it out of the park.
Yes, they knocked it out of the park, and we're not even done with the game yet.
All right, so that was The Witcher 3. We have another topic to discuss, not as extensive because it is just the start of one game's story. Are you a fan of Fallout, Tousif? Have you played the past games? It's okay if you haven't, I'm just curious.
I've played Fallout 3, and it is one of my favorite games of all time. I think that before The Witcher 3 came out, Fallout 3's open world was my favorite. It still has a very strong open world. It's a very strong game. Played New Vegas. I didn't get to finish it, and I have not played any other game in the series.
Fair enough. That's enough. That's like I would say if you take like the 90% of Fallout players, that's exactly the experience they had. Because 3 was a huge release. Tons of people bought that.
Yeah.
New Vegas wasn't as big of a deal because there wasn't that much. It wasn't made by Bethesda.
It wasn't.
And also, it just didn't have that pull because we all know numbers mean that the game is bigger and that you should, like if you have a subtitle, you're probably not that big of a deal. So people just like, I don't know what it is. Like, is that like a natural thing? Like if I were to put Fallout 4 next to New Vegas and they came out at the same time, would the same amount of marketing, would people really just pick up 4 because of that number? And I think they would, which is like...
I think they would, yeah.
That's... it's an amazing trend, or at least...
Because it seems like a game and not a DLC.
Yeah, numbers like signify order and like, this is the next one. This is the big, like, number 1, number 2, like that in-between stuff we don't really care about because we got other stuff to do. But yeah, I mentioned Fallout, and I mentioned Fallout 3 because Fallout 4 was announced, and this kind of all happened very fast. How we found out about it, well, we've been hearing rumors for about 1 or 2 years that Bethesda was working on something, and you can think of it as a TikTok cycle. First they do an Elder Scrolls tick, then they do a Fallout talk, then they do an Elder Scrolls tick, and then they do a Fallout talk. So you could go back to Oblivion, then they did Fallout 3, then they did Skyrim, and now Fallout 4. So
there's actually a rumor that development on Fallout 4 began immediately after the launch of Skyrim, because most people, we know for a fact that the main development team for Skyrim moved on to a different project, a secret project, which a lot of people figured was Fallout 4. And there was only basically a skeleton crew left, which was working on bugs and DLCs for Skyrim afterwards.
Yeah, because it's a huge game, and they needed a huge team to make that first Skyrim. So if you moved even like half or slightly more of those people to immediately start work, they can get a lot of stuff done in the past 3 years. And I think that leads into something I'll say at the end of this segment about the release date. But I wrote a quick blog post about this. I loved the way that they did this because we have this funny contrast right now where we just talked about The Witcher 3's controversies in terms of the graphics and maybe some things not looking as we thought they would. Here, they look like they've laid it all out in front of us, and they look like they're confident and they don't care if anyone complains about the graphics at this point. It's just this is the game. This isn't one well, they did the countdown clock that everyone does, and I hate that because I love just being like, I love.
Why do you hate it?
I love getting up or like just looking at my phone on Twitter like randomly, and like I love the announcements that happen out of nowhere.
Oh, the surprises.
The surprises, like, okay. Because the countdown clock just ruins the surprise. You know what it is. Like, once you saw that countdown, it was on FalloutBethesda.com, so it had to be Fallout 4. If they had announced like Fallout 3 HD Edition, there would have been so much hate on the internet. That would have been the worst, absolute worst thing that they could have done, and it would have been the worst thing. Like, that would have like ruined E3, I'm pretty sure at this point. But no, they did Fallout 4. They did the countdown clock, but they didn't do. And I think, is it just me, or does every game do a 30-second teaser every time anything is announced? Is that just like, am I imagining it? Or just tell me if that's something you've noticed too. Like the first...
Oh, I have no idea what's going on with these teasers, with the teasers for a teaser.
No 30-second teaser and no cinematic trailer, meaning we haven't done that much work, or we're not really ready to show anything, so we hired this studio that doesn't really know anything about games, but they do really good effects. So we gave them a script that is not going to happen in the actual game, but here, enjoy this. And not everyone.
Well, they don't do cinematic trailers.
Yeah, they
right?
don't usually. Yeah, so Bethesda doesn't.
They don't do cinematics at all in their games.
No,
it's all gameplay. It's all gameplay engine.
Right, and I'm just contrasting this specific example with the rest of like kind of publisherdom. They always do this consistently, but I haven't seen this for a while. It's always been a cinematic announcement from any other game, so it's very refreshing to see finally we've got a big game coming out where they're not starting off with a cinematic. They're starting off with something that's not even called a teaser trailer. If you look at the YouTube description, they just called it a debut trailer, and it's 3 minutes of solid, not gameplay, but everything looks in-engine. And there's positives and negatives. Like I said, it doesn't look that great, but Bethesda's never really been known for their technical prowess, unlike CD Projekt Red, which is a little bit of a contrast between the two studios. Yeah, I think they hit all the right notes. I'm presuming you've seen the trailer, and I think there isn't too much to say, except it looks a little bit more colorful than Fallout 3.
Yes, I was definitely going to talk about that, which doesn't... Which off the bat, this isn't saying that Fallout 3 was bad because it wasn't colorful. I think that...
It was yellow, right?
It was green.
Oh, green.
It was green.
Yeah.
I think that the palette for Fallout 3 was very appropriate for the kind of game that it was trying to create. This isn't to say that Fallout 3 was a bad-looking game because it had the color palette that it did. I think that the color palette that it employed was very effective in creating the kind of atmosphere that they were targeting. I think that the fact that the Fallout 4 trailer is much more colorful is refreshing, but it also does the job of showing you that this is not the area that we're going to be exploring in Fallout 3. In fact, the area that we're exploring in Fallout 4 is supposed to be a bit more vibrant because it's a bit more civilized, I want to say, because I know that the Institute, which is basically the remains of MIT, they're around, right? And I'm guessing if they're around, it means that they have much more in the way of technical amenities,
knowledge,
which would explain why they have a much more vibrant world up there.
Right. And also, it's I think, yeah. So Boston. I don't know if maybe I'm totally BSing this, but I would feel like during a nuclear attack, Washington would be heavier hit than Boston. So perhaps it was just like the outskirts of a bomb detonation, because that's just how this world came to be with nuclear war. So we don't really know the details. I think another point is that it could just be set later. So there's definitely like maybe the environment's recovering slightly.
Right. We don't even know about that yet. I do want to touch on the fact that it looks like, from what we've seen in the trailer, that this game is actually going to show us a bit more about how we got the world of Fallout. Do you know what I'm talking about? Because we actually saw those scenes where we have pre-nuclear war neighborhoods in the United States but they're about to experience a nuclear war. So you have them evacuating, you have the helicopters overhead. So I think that we're going to get a bit more of a clear picture of what happened in terms of the events leading up to the Fallout world.
Hmm. And I think it's a good bet because the third one did a little bit of that. You saw kind of into the past. There were a few sequences there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So no, I think that's a great point because it feels like they made a lot of footage for that specific part of the trailer that would feel kind of throwaway if it wasn't that was all an engine and it felt like it was part of the game somehow. Maybe it's just the vibe that it's giving off. Maybe we're totally wrong and that's all they did just to show it off in the trailer. But there was this sense of parallelism where you see a scene with the dog, and I'll just say that the dog was a brilliant narrative device for the trailer. You kind of followed it along just as the character was, which I thought was extremely interesting and a very good way of pacing and kind of exploring the world, not through its eyes, but like kind of from its level. Like you kind of feel like you're lower down, you're like beaten down. It's a very interesting cinematic way to cinematography, kind of, if you can call cinematography in a video game trailer. There's no actual camera, but still the dog, like I love
It applies.
yeah,
It applies.
that the one scene which was like, oh yeah, this is gonna be, or this is a great trailer already, and that was like right at the beginning where the dog, it goes up to the crib and you see a first flashback of the family, and then like there's the mobile spinning around that toy thing above the
Yes.
crib, and when it cuts to the present day, the dog is just like sniffing at, and like he like taps it at the, and there's like parts of it missing, and you just get like this how much has changed. And because it's a children's toy, that's obviously more of an emotional play that we kind of understand, and it gets closer to the heart. So I think that was a very powerful and very short moment that kind of showed that there is a sense of difference that they want to emphasize, which is why we think there's going to be some of that in the actual game.
Yeah, I think another point that is really great about the point of view, or at least the level of narration where we are basically standing next to the dog, is that we have a lot more attention focused on the floor, which we really should give a lot of credit to the tile sets for Fallout 3 because they're they set a very good mood. You see the magazines of a forgotten world, you see the wreckage and the rummage, and it's all splayed out, but it's splayed out artistically. So I think that the focus on a post-apocalyptic flora, as weird as that sounds, is very kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. Any specific scene that jumped out you wanted to kind of you fanboyed out about, or just something that was interesting? I think I really,
I have one,
yeah.
yes.
Go ahead.
Um, it's the power armor, basically. So actually, I want you to go ahead first because I have a bit to say about how we're entering this interesting age of video games where now it's all about the novelty or the success of the open world that you're trying to create. I think it's the kind of new it's the new modern warfare in that basically there was a time when a lot of video games were trying to emulate the success of modern warfare, so everyone was trying to create a really good first person shooter.
Uh,
Now I think that we're in an age
Cinematic first person shooter, linear. Yeah,
okay
yeah, I would say just to
okay
kind of,
we're in
yeah,
an age
exactly.
where everyone's trying to make the best open world game. You have the blowout open world game of Grand Theft Auto. You had Witcher 3 come out recently. You had Watch Dogs. Every year you have a different Assassin's Creed game.
Ugh.
Um, and everyone's trying to create a really novel open world. The Witcher 3, I think that was one of their mission statements, and I think they delivered on that. I was excited with the power armor and the garage because, and maybe this is me inferring way too much from way too few clues,
That's all we have
but
now.
yeah, well, so I guess I'll shoot you the idea that I had in my head. It looked like the player character, the guy from Vault 111, is going on patrol, and that the garage with the tech and the power armor belongs to him.
Hmm.
So it looks like, at least to me, if this trailer is indicative of any kind of gameplay that we're going to get from Fallout 4, that you may not be in your power armor all the time. Maybe your power armor is going to be kind of a steroid or a buff
Right.
that you can use time to time, that you have to repair it by going back to this hub, this garage that you have.
In all of the promotion,
Maybe.
yeah. No,
Once again, this is very few clues.
no, yeah. I sort of agree. The only time you see power armor being actively used is another character, and that was when he's standing. Which I was going to say was my other favorite shot, because just of the way that you don't think of Fallout, you always think you're on the ground, and I think putting you in the dropship where it was lifting up, and it wasn't just, it looked like it was all an engine and very smooth from what I saw. So I think that just shows that they're also being a little bit more confident in their, I wouldn't say like crafting abilities or anything, but it's a little bit of experimentation from at least Bethesda, which kind of really plays, you know what I mean? Like they play like their gameplay, like movement, character movement is very, not stiff, but they don't push the envelope in some of mechanical areas that other developers do. But what they do push is in the, I would say the density of kind of information in the open world. That's like another other thing that they do a lot, like books and characters speaking about the backgrounds of text. So yeah, that's like their strength. So yeah, I think that's a good theory. Again, theories are good because we only have 3 minutes of this game to discuss, or even less. So,
and once again, this is because they said the next generation of open world gaming, and I'm hoping that means more than just better hardware, so we can put some more stuff in it. I'm hoping that means some kind of new mechanic that they'll introduce in terms of interacting with the open world. And from what I saw in the teaser, that would be a cool way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so I think everyone's seen the trailer, and just in summary, it was a good trailer. First of all, very good marketing. Again, in another aspect, that they got this out before E3. There's no noise from anyone else. They got all the attention for 2 weeks, which is brilliant. Just
yes,
the marketing guy, and he's like,
I can tell that you're very excited about. Yeah, you're very excited about how well the marketing was planned out for that.
Yeah,
2 weeks of silence.
10 million views. And that's just the official version, without like the European, because there's like different versions on YouTube. Just the American version has 10 million views. Not even like everything that everyone else posted, they reposted the video and stuff. That's ridiculous. That just shows how like this franchise has kind of exploded. And I never, like, I always thought it was big, but I never thought it had reached that level. It looks like it's just humongous now. And definitely no other game does what they do in terms of the aesthetics in the world. So it's definitely justified, and they do great games. So I would say hats off to them.
My God. Our soldiers will raid. War never changes.
So, yeah, we have had a very good few weeks in the video game sphere. Just as a recap, we loved The Witcher 3, and Fallout 4's announcement impressed me on a marketing standpoint once more, and both me and Tousif and I in terms of the types of things that they showed off. We are looking forward to E3. We might do something before that, but we'll definitely cover the things that we love about the show. It's just a little over a week away. So we'll have a lot to discuss, hopefully. There's always something to discuss at E3. And I'd like to thank Tousif for joining me on this inaugural episode of The Checkpoint. Thank you, Tousif.
Thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for doing this show. I think it's a very interesting format, or at least subjects that we can talk about. We won't only talk about video games. We'll also talk about movies and TV shows that are big in pop culture, nerdom, whatever you'd like to say. So yeah, we hope that you guys like to listening to us. And so if you'd like to find out more about us or keep up to date on what we're up to, you can subscribe to this channel. Follow us at Clash Tech Blog. The website is www.clashtech.com. My Twitter handle is marcin_skok. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you once again, Tousif.
Let's go, pal.